Hey everyone, with 2 of the 3 devil letters done, we can move on to our lowercase g. Now there are going to be 2 ways that we can do this, a single story and a double story. We'll draw one of each so we can talk about how those are going to work. To finish off the terrible trio of S, A, and G, we'll grab our lowercase g. And similarly to our lowercase a, we have some options. So we'll start with that lowercase d, q, and s to get us started on this lowercase g. First, we'll imagine designing this sort of single story G here, like Glyphs is demonstrating for us. Similar to our other letter forms, we're going to start with that lowercase q. We can grab these 2 parts and bring them in here and paste it. Then we can grab part of our lowercase s. I just want this bottom part here, so we'll copy that. And back in our lowercase g, we'll paste it. This is why we have this descender overshoot, so we can have this curve down here, end at that overshoot, just like that. I'm going to quick delete some of these points that I don't need and let Glyphs try to figure out what's happening here. If I remedy that, maybe it'll give us a smooth enough curve to start with. Then, just like we've done in the past, I can Command X to get rid of this part, and I'll bring these up to about where that curve starts. Then all I have to do is bring this over till they attach, bring him up until they attach, and now I've got the beginnings of a lowercase g. What we would do is then remedy this curve so it fits in the middle there, and sort out all the components for this lowercase g. I think if we were going to do this single story G like this, we'd probably pull in the bottom of this C. So we might actually pull in this part instead of that lowercase s, so our terminal is doing something else. I'm going to quick paste it in here. It looks like it placed it where it belongs. I'll Command X to get rid of this really quickly, maybe even delete these 2 points. And then flip this a couple of times until it's at a point that I want. And this time around, instead of just straight up attaching it, I'm going to see what happens if I put it about in the middle of that weight there, bring him down to be somewhere down here in this overshoot, and now I'm going to pull these points over to attach to it. Now, like I would do, as I've done a number of times now, is work through this until that curve is quite smooth, it feels right and natural, and I'd end with a lowercase g in that single story. The other sort of G that we can draw is a double story G. Now these ones are quite a bit harder to draw, so it's going to take us some time and we're going to work through that. To start, I'm going to go and grab my lowercase o. So I'll grab this. I'm going to bring him in here. I'll paste it really quickly and then I'll pull it up to about there. That's maybe the golden section worth, if you're familiar with that ratio. And then I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to add a lowercase s. Similar to our lowercase s, a double story G has a spine that runs through it. It's that second curve. It has this upper part here that acts as that top bowl. There's a spine that leads down to a bowl down below. Most of the time, that spine runs pretty close to that baseline. So most of the weight runs through that spine, and it sits on that baseline. So starting with this lowercase s, I'm going to give us a small degree number here so I can turn it and think about what it would look like to have this lowercase g sitting on this baseline. I'm looking at this spine and thinking, okay, is this the approach that I want this lowercase g to have? It might eventually need to be a little bit smaller than that. So we can make this guy a little bit bigger. We're going to make this counter a little bit smaller. Remember, we want this, even though we scaled it, we want that visual to have the similar weight to what's going on here. And we might need to widen this out. Originally, we narrowed this out from being a perfect circle. Now we're going to widen it to give it that weight. And this will give us a pretty good starting point on this lowercase g. Now I brought this s in as a component because we're not going to actually use the points, we're just going to use it visually. If we used it as points, right now they're all over the place. They're not on the apex of any of those curves, they're not perpendicular, so it's easier for us to just start from scratch. First, I might even squash it down a little bit. So I'm going to think about if I were to squash it, just to give me a better sort of shoulder over here, and thinking about how that spine is sitting. Mine's going to be pretty close to perpendicular. That might be something I change later. But as we've done in the past, now I'll get these points to where they need to be. So again, always on the apex of those curves. Just like our S, we're going to have a pair of points through here. They'll end up being pretty close in this lowercase g. That point will have to come back and manipulate quite a bit. We'll have one on this apex here. And just like our lowercase t, the bottom of our lowercase g doesn't actually come all the way down to that descender line. He would actually come closer to this, so we'll put it there for now. This bottom bit might also have 2 points. I'll start with those. We'll add one more apex curve here, and then normally they come and they run in to the point there. We could double up and overlap this twice, and that wouldn't be such a bad idea. I'm just going to make that a corner piece and then keep going around. Once we've gone all the way around, we'll close it off as a final section, and then we'll quickly go in and add our second bit. We'll talk about how all this is going to work in just a second. So we'll add that in there. We'll get one running through here, a point at that apex, a point that would be down at this apex, and one more here before ending us off. Now before I get rid of this S, I'm going to match some of these curves that I know are working. I'm going to double click this so it becomes a corner, and I can adjust to match that end. I might bring this point down a little bit and start to match this curve. We'll probably adjust him quite a bit here in a minute. I'm going to push this end out, and we'll bring this down a little ways. All of this is probably subject to change, so it's not too important. Thinking back now, I don't think I actually will want this point here, and we'll delete that S. Then with this working, we'll select it and we'll correct that path direction so we can start to see what this lowercase g looks like in our preview. Now you can see how that S gives us a really good start through that spine, and how the O gives us a good start in that top bowl. If we want to bring this down at all, we can double click to select this, and I'm going to hold shift so it scales just a little bit more. And I'll bring these points down a little bit just so that this end gets a little bit tighter in here. We can sort of think about this S spine, or now this lowercase g spine, as being the center point of a pyramid, and that this top bowl needs to rest in the center of it. So if I'm looking at that preview, I might move this over a little bit just so he sits closer to that center, and eventually we'll add an ear up there as well. But for now, we'll go in and keep editing this. I want this backstroke to come out about even, if not a little bit further out. Again, now we're drawing that sort of base of that pyramid. And here's what I'm talking about, probably not needing this point. With this point here, it sits really flat, so I'll just go ahead and get rid of it. And then this point here, he didn't come with a handle, so we'll just hold Option and click on that path to bring it back. And now we have things to work with. What we want in this lowercase g is to have most of the weight through that spine, to have it still have some weight through this right side, and then to go back into a thin. Remember, our horizontals are thin and our verticals are thick. And that means that we need to try and get some weight back into this end over here. So we might try to thicken him out and smooth this curve up a little bit so that he has some of that weight. we really need to work on this guy here. He's got a lot of issues coming out of this. What I might do is tuck this in a little bit more so we can have still thin. I want this thin connection here, but I also want this to have some thickness and to feel like a smooth curve, which at the moment it's not quite. It's sort of fighting me a little bit. That may be because this handle is too long or my point's in the wrong spot. Let's see what happens if I move it up here. Looks like that'll get me a little bit closer. So just like we did with our S, we'll manipulate this and work through it until we get something that's starting to look like a really nice, smooth lowercase g. Some of these things that I'm trying, they're working. Some of these things I'm trying, they're not working. And that's okay. That's the type design process. When I get to this point and I'm looking at this and now I've pretty well got this pyramid sorted out, I could probably bring this out a little bit more. I don't need it to sit too far out there. I might go in and double check that my thickness is working well. So again, comparing to these other characters, is this stroke and that moment similar and related to this moment and that stroke? Are these things connected? Do they feel like they belong to one another? And that feels like we're in the ballpark for sure. So we'll just adjust a couple more things here, and then we'll go in and add our final ear. To get our ear, we've already drawn that bit, and we didn't connect it together. We're going to grab it from our lowercase r, and we'll go into this lowercase g, and we'll add this ear up here. Now we can see when we initially add it that it's much too big, much bigger than it needs to be. So we can scale it. I'll scale it until it gets to be about a size that we want. So this gives me the right sort of white space in between here. And I might pull this all the way up to the top of that overshoot. So I have the right white space here and underneath it, but it does need to be just a little bit bigger. So our scaling worked to get us to a good working position, and we'll end up moving these points around until we have something that's just a little bit larger, so it feels like it was drawn with the same tool as the rest of the letter form was written with. And just like that, we have a pretty good looking serif lowercase double story G. If that wasn't a mouthful, I'm not sure what is. For our sans serif version, we could do something similar. Generally, our serif versions have the double story and our sans serif have a single story. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and maybe I should have saved that lowercase g that we did before, but I'll just duplicate what we did really quickly. We'll bring it into this sans serif layer. Again, we'll bring that Q in. We'll bring most of this C this time instead of that S. We'll paste it and flip him a pair of times. And once we start to get this G looking about right, we'll get on out of here with a successful pair of lowercase g's. You can see how it's been a benefit to save these letters for last, the G, A, and the S, because so much of these letter forms we're stealing from other letters. It could be a headache, and it definitely is and has been a headache in the past for me when I'm just starting these letters from scratch and not pulling from things that I've built up over time. So building up over time and starting with elements that are easier, where we're only tackling one problem at once, is much more manageable than when we're just going headstrong into a letter form that's really, really complicated. Now with both of these done, we can start to type some really big words. We can say digging or fog, dog, whatever else we might want to say. We can go ahead and make sure that our side bearings are something that makes sense. And just like that, we can make sure that that G is working. He feels right in the sans serif context, and he feels right in that serif context. Once we add more characters to it, like the S and these other characters that we've been using all along, we can start to see if it's working or what it might need to do to change. But in that collection, and that's how we're going to work through that lowercase g, both single story and double story. Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope you were able to gain something along the way, even if it's just a hotkey or how to move some points around that is different than what you may have otherwise known. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos coming out every single week, and comment or tag or share it with some other designers who you think would design some awesome fonts.